interesting. That breaks the whole solidity of the storyline, of the romantic melodrama of dying or of a relationship.
Just being able to pull away and observe it.
But the thing with a spiritual journey is you can't up-level and push away the stuff. You got to stay in the stuff. You got to really stay in it. I mean, I'm in a relationship now. I'm feeling jealousy, anger, self-pity, loneliness. The least little thing can throw me off, and I'll have depressions. And I'm blown away that here I am, this spiritual muck-a-muck that is going through all this stuff. And there's a part of me that is so delighted to be ferreting this out, bringing it to the light, and living with it, for change, instead of just pontificating about it from afar.
What about our relationship to the world and that whole, just think of the statement you made about chaos and how, from one perspective, the world can appear to be in absolute chaos and imminent destruction on the horizon. How do we deal with that relationship?
Again, we deal with our own reactions to it first. That's the closest way in, because until we have enough spaciousness in our minds, which comes from no fear, no hope, no expectations that it's going to be this way or that way. In other words, no clinging to a model of the universe, a temporal model of the universe as a fixed scenario in which anything else would be bad, merely open to the possibilities. Then you're quiet enough to be able to hear how it is and figure out what the optimum response is to try to relieve suffering and to make the universe a peaceful and loving place to live. And I think that it's like judo. You know where to put your hand at the right moment because you're quiet enough inside to see the existential moment. And so it keeps coming back to the inner space as to what the outer universe looks like and what you can do. We are caught up in waves of fear, fear that the world's going to change, which it's going to change. It is going to change. I mean, we're caught up in new feelings of impotence. I mean, in the Iranian, the students in the Iranian embassy can bring the United States to its knees. And all the Texans are saying, go out and get him, but how are you going to go get him? What are you going to do? I mean, we've gotten to the point now where we've either got an overkill of nuclear energy or nothing, We can't get into Iran to do that. So it's quite an exquisite situation. We're still like teenagers that were given the family jet for the evening or something like that, We haven't learned much humility in our world relationships yet. We don't know diplomacy yet. We just know power politics.
I think the important point of what you were saying is having that capacity, and it keeps coming back to having that willingness and capacity to move away from the chaos, to be able to step back and to observe it and see it from a distance and not be so immersed in it.
It's really hard for people who are feeling the pain of the suffering that exists in the universe not to respond to that pain by leaping forward in action. And often their action is reactive action, which merely continues the polarization. And it takes that little mediated time lapse of space in which the stimulus comes in, like the starvation in Cambodia. There is the agony in one's heart, and then there is the quieting and the appreciation of the whole universal scene, in which you're not acting to alleviate that because you are judging God to have made an error. You are still within the perfection of the universe, including Cambodia, but including your yearning from a deep place to help those people. But that then comes out of an appreciation of the whole thing and merely understanding your part. It doesn't come out of anger, it comes out of love. For the whole game, the whole.
How about that criticism that comes up on occasion about, that's a cop-out, that's a way for you to escape doing something about what's really going wrong in the world? And we hear that sometimes.
Well, I think that if the response is totally merely withdrawal or meditation, and that were the only response, that very few people would be doing that in a pure way. Most people would be doing it in a cop-out way. I agree. And I think the one thing I found in the past few years is that I had to, for my spiritual work, I had to hear what Alan Watts used to say to me. Ramdas, God is these forms. God isn't just formless. You're too addicted to formlessness. And I had to learn, and I've got to honor my incarnation. I've got to come back and honor what it means to be a man, a Jew, an American, a member of the world, a member of the ecological community, all of that stuff. I have to figure out how to do that, how to be in my family, how to honor my father, all of this. And that's the way I come to God, through acknowledging my uniqueness, if you will, which is an interesting turnabout in a way. And that brings spiritual people right back into the world that I've got to face continually. Like when I work in the Sava Foundation, this project that I've been involved in with Larry Brilliant and Wavy Gravy and good people. A woman came up to me one day and she said to me, I heard one of your tapes in which you were telling us that in India there were 7 million people waiting for cataract operations, which literally they are blind now. They have to be led around. They cannot add to the workforce. They are totally dependent, which in a third world country is tough business to be that dependent. And they need an operation which takes 4 minutes and costs $5. And she said, we were about to put in a hot tub that was going to cost $2,000, and I thought, for that, 400 people could see it now. And she said, I just sent the check to save it. And I have to face, what do I do with my next $5? See, it's got to come together sooner or later. We had all these little compartments in our mind, like Cambodia. Who's starving in Cambodia? Are we starving in Cambodia, or is it the Cambodians? Is it them, or is it us? And I say to people, if it was your father that was starving, or that needed the eye operation, would you go to the movies with your $5? You say, of course, it's my father. Well, what about your Uncle Fred? Well, what about your Uncle Fred's friend? Well, who are the Cambodians? Are they your Uncle Fred's friends? Where are they? And when we decide it's them, because that philosophy that it's them is what isolates us, which creates the fact that we can allow ourselves to be 6% of the population using 40% of the resources in the world. And realize that the dissonance between haves and have-nots is what the root of our own fear is. That we're paying the price for the luxuries we're having while other people can't survive with fear. And that fear is just going to get worse until we let go. It's like a bird with a fish in its mouth, and other birds are flying at it and pecking it. And as long as it holds on to the fish, they're going to keep pecking it. The minute it lets go of the fish, it's free. That doesn't mean you don't get any fish, but maybe you don't get the whole fish.
Mm-hmm. Is there a biting the bullet aspect to that, a sacrifice?
Well, it's interesting, because I'm doing a preface for a book by Dwayne Elgin called Voluntary Simplicity. And it's really very far out to see that the things that are going to be imposed upon us, the biting of the bullet, imposed us because of economic necessities, energy crunch, inflation, social, economic pressures from the rest of the world. These are changes in style of living that the more you get into your own being, the more you yearn to simplify, the more the attachments mean less to you, the more you would lead that kind of a life intentionally, voluntarily. So it's an interesting interface between people that are forced to do something and people who choose to do that thing. And they turn out, with a certain kind of education and space, a lot of these transitions, instead of being excruciatingly painful for the culture, could literally be a release and an opening. And that's part of what our whole educational work is, the New Dimensions does, and I guess I can too.
The system, as it exists, doesn't provide a lot of support for that kind of choice.
Exactly not. But it will. You see, when it moves a little slowly, and there's still an inertia in which it's still thinking that it can hold on to its dream, with a little more violence or something, or a little tight or something, it can still have the dream. That's the sort of denial stage we're still at.
The guns and butter dream.
If I give up a little of this, can I have this? And can I still have my motorboat and my plans for the future? Right? And it's only when you realize that that's not going to work that it gets interesting for the culture. And at that point, then the thinkers, quote, whoever they are, that are defining policy, start to build the other myths for America. See, you can go back to Abe Lincoln splitting logs, and everybody can be out splitting logs to be like Abe Lincoln. I mean, you can do that with just media work. You can build any myth you want with this culture. That's what presidents learn, that they can manipulate the myth, the imagery in people's minds as to Like when we were in the Second World War, I remember the myth of the United States was entirely different than the myth is now.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll learn to do it soon enough.
Well, I have no idea, and I know that until I am quiet enough so that I don't care whether we do or not, I will never hear whether or not we could or will. You understand that? In Ramana Maharshi, somebody said, "What's the future of the world?" He says, "You don't even know the present. Why do you worry about the future?"
Ramdas, perhaps you can tell us a little more about the Seva project and how people can get involved in it. Then I'll give an address as well.
The Seva project is a fascinating phenomenon from my point of view. It was originally started by some people who had been involved in the ending of the smallpox in the world with a certain kind of devotion and intensity and joyful camaraderie about serving human beings. They were just beautiful people. They worked in Southeast Asia. And when they got all done, the joy of having done this masterful thing of helping to wipe out smallpox, they wanted to continue with this kind of esprit de corps, and they looked about for another project and decided to focus on blindness as the first of the projects of the Seva Foundation. Because it turns out 80% of the world's blind are unnecessarily so. They're needless. Either because of cataracts, which can be removed, or because of infections which can be helped with the simplest types of salves and ointments and things like that. So it was decided to start in the western part of Nepal, and it was a groovy Swiss-French woman doctor, Nicole Grasset, who had headed the operation in India on smallpox. A tough broad, really good, beautiful woman, strong, very effective. We came together as a group, and the group blew my mind that Larry Brilliant had brought together, because it included hippie people like me and Wavy Gravy, as well as people from the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, people from the World Health Organization, from things like that. So the interface was exquisite. One guy comes in with a necktie and a dispatch case, and he sits down next to Wavy Gravy, who has a hat on with an airplane propeller in it, and they look at each other. We're in northern Michigan in a retreat for 3 days, and by the end of 3 days, there was great love and respect among all of us, because we recognized in each other that we really cared about Seva, which means in Sanskrit word for service. And we met a cross-cultural boundaries, if you will, in our joy of service. And we've become, our board includes the people like Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead. It includes Dr. Venkateswamy, who's won a knighthood in India for his work in eye surgery with arthritic hand. He's beautiful. So what we're doing now is starting the project in Nepal to get rid of unnecessary blindness with the Nepali government. We're gathering money. We got $1 million from the Dutch government. We're doing all right. I mean, it's $1.5 million I think we have now between the Swiss and Dutch government. But there are opportunities for people to do voluntary work. There are opportunities for people to give money. There's all kinds of
People can write to Seva, that's S-E-V-A, and the address is 519 Castro Street, San Francisco, 94114. That's Seva, 519 Castro Street, San Francisco, California, 94114. Ramdas, here we are in the 80s, and you're as good as anyone to talk about where we've been and where we are now in the 60s. Some have been referred to media-wise as the psychedelic 60s, and the 70s. I don't think they haven't added yet. The media has called it the me decade, but I disagree with that. Where do you see we are now? What do you see the difference between where we've been and where we are right now? What's happening?
Well, I guess you look at who the we is you're talking about. There were a group of people, if I just stay with a very certain group who went through the 60s and 70s in these kind of movements, for example. Psychedelic 60s seemed to open for us the possibility. We tried to grab it and make it ours in the way one would do anything in the Westerner, which is learn it, achieve it, manipulate it, control it. We learned that the game is a little bigger than that. and that we were going to have to make peace with it. We were going to have to come into, as Florence Kluckholm talks about, human in relation to the universe rather than over control and control over. More of a Taoist way. So the 70s were really getting ourselves purified of a lot of our attitudes to be open to how the universe is, quieting down, working on ourselves, cleaning out a lot of our devil. I feel, I don't know how much my own inner feelings reflect what's happening. I feel a recognition now that I am, that all people suffering is my suffering, and that I feel that it is required that I get my act together. I don't think I can live with all these different models in my head, and with all this duplicity. I don't think I can live as an American the way I've been living and get away with it anymore. And I don't yet know what the implications are, but I really feel some sense of service or humanity. It's not even service, even sounds like you're doing something for somebody. It's that I have to do it for myself.
So is it shedding a lot of baggage and kind of coming down to just what you need?
It may be a kind of a simplification of life in an economic and social sense. It may be a political, I think the 80s are going to see political increase in authoritarianism initially, and a loss of the kind of constitutional freedoms, and then out of fear. And then if the game goes well, out of that may come a reflowering of the appreciation that the basic institution of the society is the individual human heart. And all the big institutions must finally honor that, which is what's getting lost in the shuffle. So I would like to think that it was a realignment of institutions in that direction that's going to happen. And it's going to be a hard one.
I wonder why the spiritual side of life does get left out, does get missed.
It's because it's who's born on earth. You know? It's like, as Buddha said, you come with the 5 hindrances, which is lust and greed, anger, agitation, sloth, and doubt. If you don't have those, you don't get born into this club. So when you're going to make up a club and it's going to have those 5 groups in it, what do you expect? I mean, I think we're doing our thing perfectly. We're
doing this vision of somebody putting, you go.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way it is.
You stay.
Sure. And so there's hardly anybody around that doesn't have at least one of them, probably all 5 of those things, and that's what we get. It's a training program, if you will, and we can't be afraid of our own training program.
It's really seeing the challenges as opportunities to
yeah, of course, to see that, you already have started awakening. The awakening's already happened. But the thing is that for literally millions of people in this world at this moment, that awakening has happened. And that's what's interesting. There's another interesting thing that I don't yet know how to handle or understand, because I've always avoided things like the Aquarian Age or the New Age or all that kind of stuff, saying that's all astral melodrama. I don't know how the story comes out. I don't know if this is new or old. But I'm now really reflecting about the fact that the formless spirit comes through a consciousness, and for the most part, the stuff we work with is formlessness that's come through the consciousness of Eastern cultures. And that we are now just beginning to have that come through and conceptualize through our consciousness, which is a technologically sophisticated material culture. And that may make quite a difference. There may be some kind of new amalgam of East-West in the people who have been really working on themselves very hard. And that may make a sizable difference, because we are hunting for new myths in this culture this moment. And it's up for grabs. It really is. It's up to the purest being.
When you say hunting for new myths, could you describe that a little more?
Well, the frontier myth and the myth that more is better and you just up the GNP every year and everything comes out right, that's all crumbling now. You know, that isn't the one that's going to do it. We all know that now. And there's going to have to be a realignment of the definition of who we are and what we're doing on Earth. And I think the tremendous increase in fundamental Christianity is a reflection of that need for that, to reawaken the myth and put juice into it now. Just to deal with people's fears when there is a crumbling of the myth they've all been living by. The whole expectation was your kids would have more than you had, and more would be better in the sense of getting more pleasure. And the culture has now shown in video, in color, in every home 5 hours a day that more isn't better. There's still the malaise, there's still the feeling of separateness, the feeling of isolation. So people say, well, if what we thought was going to give it to us isn't, what now? And at that cusp is creativity, is change, is growth, is everything, or it's incredible fear. And denial, and anger, and all the stuff you do when something's dying. Something is dying. Something is dying in our culture. It's big. It's really big what's dying. I love it. I just love it.
It's probably another age of the death of dinosaurs.
Yeah, it's profound. It's really profound. Because you can feel the moral values falling apart. Like the family has disintegrated, the marriage. Nobody's expected to keep one marriage now for a lifetime any longer. We're certainly not in California statistically. There's so many breaks in the thread, the amount of crime, the amount of white-collar crime, the moral tone of getting away with what you can with the IRS. It's a very different scene than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We're going through a whole breakdown of Protestant ethic, of work ethic, of the puritanical values. The repercussions of all this are incredible in terms of who we can become now. If we don't blow it, if we don't get too scared.
And yet the return to the Christian model, which really, in the religious sense, sort of puts suffering on a very high level. There's something about that that's kind of weird too.
It's tricky. The thing that's weird about it is that it's so involved with good and evil. It's ultimately a righteousness trip. And righteousness isn't liberation. Righteousness is just righteous. You end up right, but not free.
Yeah.
And if you want to be free, don't get caught in righteousness. You do things that are dharmic. You do things that don't screw other people's trips up. But beyond that, I mean, and you do that because that's what you do. Because if you do something that's going to screw somebody else's trip, you got the karma. Very simple. But at the same moment, you don't have to emotionally get involved in the duality of good and evil. And almost all Christianity is caught there. It only goes that far. It doesn't go to I am a miserable sinner when it gets to it.
Yeah. So what do each of us do next? What do we do next? What do we do now?
What do we do now? Well, I think we learn how to quiet our minds, to open our hearts, to maintain our environment and our body, our environment with honor and with respect. I think we cultivate things like humility and peacefulness and caring. And I think we learn how to love the universe just the way it is. We learn how to see it as the beauty of God's law made manifest. And we learn how to take joy in the moment, and we learn how to accept the responsibility that we are all one consciousness in many bodies, and we are one family. And I think we don't get caught in any fixed models about what the future is. We just stay open to all possibilities. And I think we do the best to bring whatever wisdom comes through us to bear in the marketplace, to teach people that you can't have all the nuclear energy you want without perhaps wiping us all out, probably wiping us all out. And that aggressiveness, I think we have to learn a lot about